We are at this moment in time in a human energy crisis. 70% of the workforce right now says they are experiencing extremely high degrees of stress and low degrees of energy. That's an extraordinarily high number. And for the past 10 years, what I have been doing is I've been traveling around the world, stepping up to people who have reached the top of their game, sitting down with them and asking them, what were the habits that really took you to where you are? And what I was really interested in is, why is it that some people are able to gain momentum in their lives and in their careers, even through the setbacks, when others of us fizzle out? What is that thing? What is that difference? The people who don't reach their potential, very rarely do they run out of time. Very rarely do they run out of talent. What they almost always run out of is energy. Energy is your capacity to get things done. We might have brilliant visions, we might have great goals, we might have perfect plans, but if we don't have capacity, then we can't bring those things into reality. And the challenge is that right now, everywhere we look, people seem to be running low on this capacity. Well, I've come today with good news. When we learn how to manage our energy, we no longer feel suffocated by the number of hours in the day. You can find more focus, you can find more creativity, you can find more resilience. Even better news is that you don't have to wait. You don't have to wait for the perfect moment to transform your energy. You can start today, right now.
As the founding CEO of a breakthrough wellness company and Harvard Medical School visiting scholar, Suneel helped thousands of people build better habits for life.
He's a thought leader, challenging us to align who we are with what we do.
Get ready to be inspired. Suneel Gupta.
Engagement isn't just about the number of hours that we put towards a task. It's about the quality of the energy that we bring to it. And so how do we put all of this into practice? One of the tools I want to put in your backpack is what I call the 55-5 model. And what that basically means is that whenever possible, for every 55 minutes of work, you're taking 5 minutes of focused, deliberate rest. What the science tells us is that each of those 5 minutes is going to make the other 55 minutes far more effective, far more energetic, far more creative, far more collaborative. And that energy is going to wear off on the people around you. So think about this in the context of your day. How are you making decisions? How are you dealing with setbacks? I'm not just talking about being happier or having more joy or having less stress. We're talking about being a better leader, having more focus. Every dimension that we really care about, all fire at a higher level when we're taking these short little breaks throughout the day. When people go to an event, they're not just looking for information and inspiration, they're looking for connection. That's one of the reasons that I run a note card exercise where I have you write down one thing in your life or your work that you're struggling with right now. And then for the course of 5 minutes, what we do is we start exchanging these cards around. And any card that you can relate to, I invite you to turn the card over and jot your name or maybe even your email address down in the back of the card. And over the course of that 5 minutes, you feel the room pull together in a really dramatic way. When organizers come up to me after an event, they say not only was that the turning point for the session, but it was a turning point for the event itself. You can't go a single day of your life without having an impact. The question is, what kind of an impact do you want to have? When we have this new energy, when we have this new level of vitality, how do we bring that into the world? And the way that we bring this into the world is by playing what I call the game of now. There are 3 words that tend to hold us back from what we want in life. 3 words. And those 3 words are, I'm not ready. The thing that I want to leave you with today is, after spending over a decade studying some of the most extraordinary people on the planet, what I can tell you is that they all had one thing in common. They were not ready, but they all played the game of now. One of my favorite examples of that is a story about this woman, Damayanti Hingorani. And what made her story remarkable is that she grew up in poverty. No running water, no electricity, but she had this very unlikely dream. She wanted to become an engineer with Ford Motor Company. But there was one big problem. This was the 1960s, and Ford Motor Company did not have any female engineers on staff. She decides that she's not going to play the game of someday, she's going to play the game of now. So she turns around, she looks at this hiring manager, and she tells him her story. about all the sacrifice that it took for her to get to this country. And over the course of the next hour, this hiring manager is so inspired. He's so impressed. He fights with his bosses. And in 1967, this woman becomes Ford Motor Company's very first female engineer. Well, that was my mom. 3 friends from design school were not ready to start Airbnb. 2 bagel shop owners were not ready to become Ben & Jerry's. A 15-year-old from Stockholm, Sweden wasn't ready to build a movement. But they all played the game of now. So I want to make a pact. As of this moment, we have 100% of our lives remaining. Let's spend it playing the game of now. Let's not wait for courage in order to take action. Let's take action and let courage catch up along the way. Because if nobody has told you this, you are ready. Thank you so much.
We've heard that great leaders start with why, right? But great leaders also start with who. Start with who. Who are we serving? You know, Pablo Picasso had this great quote, which is, the meaning of life is to find your gift, and the purpose of life is to give it away. The meaning of life is to find your gift, and the purpose of life is to give it away. Our job as leaders, and what it means to lead with purpose, is ultimately to tap into people's gifts, to understand what makes them come alive. We talked about that in the last habit. But then to switch the spotlight, to shift it to who are we trying to serve, and making sure that that idea never really gets lost. You know, I talked about Groupon and our experience with Groupon. And one of the things I'll share with you is that when we first started the company, we were completely obsessed with small businesses. Our job was to serve the small business. So if you walk through the early halls of Groupon, what you would find is pictures, photos of the small businesses we were serving. We were constantly telling stories about the people we were serving. But as we became a bigger company, we started to take on investors, and eventually we went public. It turned from the stories into the numbers. We were completely focused on the numbers. We were focused on profit. We were focused on bottom line. We were focused on efficiencies. Now, the thing about that is that when things are good, numbers can be fine. You know, people will pay attention to numbers. But when things get bad, when things get tough, when we go through our trials and tribulations, numbers don't matter as much anymore. It's stories that really fuel people's purpose. All right? So when we shifted from purpose, when we shifted from story to the numbers, we lost our sense of purpose. We lost what it was that we were actually doing this for. And when things started to turn tough, a lot of talent left the building. A lot of people left the company. Okay, so the best companies are the ones that not just focus on who we're serving, but they keep the focus there. I learned this years later when I started my company. I started a company called Rise, and what we did was one-on-one nutrition coaching, one-on-one health coaching over your mobile phone. And I remember I was out there pitching investors, and I got rejected over and over and over again. I got rejected by over a dozen investors in a row. But in one of the meetings, an investor asked me a question that completely changed things around for me. And what he asked me is, why are you doing this? Like, who are you doing this for? And I told him a story. I said, you know, the reason that this company matters to me is because when my dad was in my age, when he was in his mid-40s, a photo of here, this is me with a bow tie behind him. When my father was about this age, he had an emergency triple bypass surgery. He was rushed to the hospital. By the time I was out of school, he was already on the operating table. And I remember more than anything else the drive from the hospital back home. So days later, after he was discharged, I remember that for the first time, he was sitting in the passenger seat. My mom was driving the car. And I had never seen that before. My dad always drove. And he was sitting there in the passenger seat, and he looked so old. He looked so frail. And I remember thinking to myself, like, come on, Dad. You've got to be strong again. You've got to be a dad again. And I had no idea if that was going to happen. But thankfully, he turned his life around. You know, he started to eat better. He started to exercise. He started to take care of himself. And, you know, that was over 30 years ago. Doctors had no idea if he was going to live another 10 years, but it's been over 30 years, and I just talked to him this morning. He walked 3 miles. But he had a lot of help. You know, he had doctors, he had nurses, he had people who cared for him. He also had the help of a health coach. Insurance kicked in and helped him pay for somebody who could help him be accountable, who could adjust his exercise, adjust his sleep, and really kind of help him create a better life for himself. And I wanted nothing more than to take that type of service and to make that accessible, to make that affordable for other people. So, taking us back to that moment with that investor, I tell him that story. And he looks at me and he says, "Why didn't you tell that story inside the room?" And I said, well, because I was pitching a business, right? I'm pitching like a new startup, a new business, so I've got to focus on the numbers. I've got to focus on the market size. I've got to focus on total addressable market, all the business metrics. And he said, yeah, but here's the thing. When you tell that story, you become a different person. When you share that story, you come alive in a brand new way. And so why don't you tell that story, and then you can get into the numbers. Then you can get into market size. I made that one simple shift. That one simple shift. I started telling my dad's story at the beginning of every time I met an investor, every time I met a partner. We were able to raise millions of dollars of funding. We were able to partner with the White House. Apple named us Best App of the Year because I would share that story first. That is the power of what it is that you do here in this room, because you do shape people's lives, you save people's lives, and you give people hope. Telling those stories, making sure those stories are front and center, not just for you, but for the people around you, is our job as leaders. See, high momentum leaders do all the time is play what I call the game of now. And the game of now is different than the game of someday. Because with the game of now, you're not waiting for courage in order to take action. You're taking action, and you're letting courage catch up along the way. Because I think that there are three words that tend to hold us back from what we want. Three words. And those three words are, I'm not ready. I'm not ready. I'm not ready to speak my mind. I'm not ready to run with that idea. I'm not ready to give myself a voice. But the thing that I want to share with you right now is that after spending 10 years studying some of the most extraordinary people on the planet, what I realized is that they all have one thing in common, which is that none of them were ready. And one of my favorite Game of Now stories of all time is the story of this woman, Damayanti Hingorani. And what makes her story really remarkable, Time magazine called her a trailblazer, is that she grew up in poverty. No running water, no electricity, but she had a dream. She had a vision for herself. And that vision was that one day she wanted to become an engineer with Ford Motor Company. And her village and her parents got behind the dream. She was able to get on a boat to the United States, where she got a scholarship to Oklahoma State University. Where are my Oklahoma people? Oklahoma people? No, but Oklahoma. Well, after she leaves Oklahoma, she goes to Detroit, Michigan. Where are my Detroit people? Any Detroit people? Yeah, we got some Detroit people. Okay, all right. We are in the Midwest. So we got some Detroit people. So she goes to Detroit, and she's ready to apply for her dream job, and she gets into a room with the hiring manager, but there was one big problem. This hiring manager, he looks at her and he says, wait a second, are you applying for the job of an engineer? And she said, yeah. And he says, well, look, I'm sorry, we don't have any female engineers working here right now. See, this was the 1960s, and Ford Motor Company had thousands of engineers on staff, but not a single one of them was a woman. So it's a really deflating moment, right? She could feel her dreams slipping out of her hands. She picks up her resume, she picks up her purse, and she begins to walk out of the door. But before she turns the handle, she decides that she's not going to play the game of someday. She's going to play the game of now. She's not going to wait for courage in order to take action. She's going to take action and let courage catch up along the way. So she musters up all the energy she can. She turns around, she looks this hiring manager in the eyes, and she tells him her story about all the sacrifice that it took for her to get to this country, to get to this city, to get to this very room. And then she says to him, look, if you don't have any female engineers on staff, let's work together. Let's go hire the best of the best and go create a killer team. And this hiring manager in this moment gets so inspired that he goes out and he decides to fight with his colleagues. He fights with his bosses. And in 1967, this woman, Damayanti Hingorani, becomes Ford Motor Company's first female engineer. And the story has, thank you. I think it's a great story. And it actually, there's a little bit of a twist because she's driving her car around Detroit, and ironically enough, her car breaks down. So she walks to a phone booth, because they had phone booths back then. And when she gets to the phone booth, she realizes she didn't really have anybody to call. See, because she's a newcomer to the country. She doesn't really know anybody. So she opens up the phone book, and she calls the most common Indian name that she can think of. The stranger who answers the phone on that day decides to perform an act of kindness. He finds Damayanti at the side of the road, and together, the two of them, they fix that car, and they fall in love. That man became her future husband and my father. So they start a family together. They have 2 sons, my brother Sanjay and me. And as you can tell, Sanjay's a little bit older than I am. But what they passed on to both of us is to play the game of now. Don't play the game of someday, play the game of now. Don't wait for courage in order to take action and let courage catch up along the way. So, Sanjay grows up to become a medical doctor. He's practicing in suburban Michigan when one day he has this idea that maybe he could be on the news reporting what's happening with healthcare in this country. Now, he doesn't have any journalism experience. He doesn't have any on-air experience, but he decides he's going to play the game of now. And after getting rejected a few times, he finally finds himself a job. And for the past 20 plus years, he's been reporting the news as Dr. Suneel Gupta on CNN. As far as my parents go, they are still alive. They are still with us. And in fact, they're with us here right now. So what do you say? Should we bring my mom up to the stage? I wish I could bring her to stage all the time. But the truth is that she is really always with me. Even if she's not with me, she's always with me. And I think we all probably have somebody like that in our lives, somebody who gives us energy, somebody who gives us momentum. And the truth is that you can channel that person really at any time. That's what I do for Mom, because she's a reminder of why I do what I do, but she's also a reminder of why you do what you do. Because beneath the numbers, beneath the spreadsheets, beneath the deadlines, you empower people, you lead people, you help them achieve their aspirations. And by doing that, you help make their story possible, just the same way that people made our story possible. And so I want us to make a pact together right now as a community. And that pact is that we are not going to play the game of someday. We're going to play the game of now. We're not going to wait for courage in order to take action. We're going to take action, and we're going to let courage catch up along the way, because it always will. And I want us to seal that pact right now, together, all of us, by saying 3 times, I am ready. Okay, so we're ready to do this?
Yes.
All right, let's go. Number 1, I am ready. Again, I am ready. Louder. I am ready. You bet you are. Go get them.